Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, September 17, 2024. Growing calls to increase the Secret Service budget and provide protection for presidential nominees, especially Republican Donald Trump, after the latest assassination attempt against him. Also, debate over whether divisive political rhetoric and from which side is encouraging the violence. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announces a state criminal investigation of the second assassination attempt of Donald Trump. Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, gets an interview with a panel of journalists from the National Association of Black Journalists. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he'll bring to a House floor vote on Wednesday a bill to fund the federal government for 6 months to prevent a shutdown at the end of this month, paired with a bill to require proof of citizenship to register to vote in elections. And the combined bill was pulled from the floor last week amid speculation it didn't have the votes to pass. Senate Republicans, for a second time, block a bill to guarantee access to IVF, in vitro fertilization, nationwide. And pagers carried by thousands of Hezbollah members in Lebanon exploded around the same time, killing 8, injuring nearly 3,000 people. In an apparent coordinated attack, Israel is not commenting. We'll hear from the U.S. State Department spokesperson. Story from NBC News: Congress is considering boosting funding for the Secret Service after what the FBI called an apparent second attempt on former President Donald Trump's life in 10 weeks. Leaders of both parties and top appropriators say one possibility is to attach emergency funding for the Secret Service to a short-term funding bill that Congress must pass by September 30th to avert a government shutdown. But they're also studying another option, giving the Secret Service the opportunity to shift resources and spend more money to guard protectees in the final stretch of the campaign. That was from NBC News. Senator Gary Peters, Democrat of Michigan, chairs the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. He was questioned about Secret Service protection of presidents and candidates and funding issues. At a roundtable today with reporters, it was hosted by the Christian Science Monitor. He also mentions his committee's investigation of the first assassination attempt against former President Trump.
Given Sunday's apparent assassination attempt on Donald Trump, should the former president have the same level of protection that President Biden has?
Well, clearly he needs to have all the protection that he needs in order to stay safe. We have to make sure that he can campaign safely, and not only he can campaign safely, but people who show up at those rallies all feel that they're safe. This is anytime you have an assassination attempt on a president or any elected official, it's a direct attack on our democracy and our ability to have campaigns and everyone to speak freely and speak their mind. So yes, to your question, yes, Secret Service needs to provide whatever protection is necessary.
Same level that President Biden has?
Given what's happening, I'd be fully supportive of that. Yes, absolutely.
And the money is available?
Well, we have to make sure the resources are there. We're going to have to look at that because the Secret Service is stretched a great deal with all of their demands. It's pretty clear that they can't be everywhere all the time without resources to be able to actually do that. And so I think there's some effort to try to get additional resources in the short term. But long term, we have to examine that. Right now, my committee is engaged in a really kind of full investigation into the initial assassination attempt. It's a bipartisan effort. We plan to put out our interim report, hopefully certainly by the end of the work period, so I guess that's less than 2 weeks now. We'll put out our interim report. We found an awful lot of information. You'll see a lot in that report, but we still need to know a lot more, and we are asking for more documents, more interviews from folks who are involved in that event to get to the facts. We're still pushing to get that information.
You're talking about the first one.
The first one. And so we'll outline that it's an interim report. It should not be viewed as the final report. Right. That'll be an interim report, and we're going to talk about what we've learned so far, recommendations that are likely to follow as a result of what we had learned so far, but also outline all that we still need to know to get a sense of it. And now that we have another attempt, clearly we'll be briefed on that, and we'll be considering that as well going forward.
Senator Gary Peters, Democrat from Michigan, at a Christian Science Monitor reporters breakfast in Washington, D.C. He got those questions because he's chair of the Homeland Security Committee. He also chairs the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. And so we got a lot of questions about election strategy in the Senate races for November. You can find the full video of this program at our website, cspan.org. Back to the NBC News article, Congress appropriated $3.1 billion for the Secret Service for the current 2024 fiscal year, which was $265.6 million above funding for fiscal year 2023 and significantly more than the $1.8 billion appropriated a decade ago. Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican of Alabama, posting on X, there have been 2 assassination attempts on President Trump over the past 2 months. The agents in his detail acted heroically both times, but it is beyond evident that his current level of security is inadequate. I am demanding accountability and action from the Secret Service. That was the post from Senator Tuberville. He and other Republicans held a news conference today.
We have a huge mental health problem in this country. But when you hear on TV and the radio and on social media about this guy's a Hitler, this guy's a fascist, he's a threat to democracy, what do you expect? All you have to do is look at some of these tweets I have here from some of our so-called politicians. And then you got people like Hillary Clinton, George Clooney, Joy Reid, Robert De Niro, wannabe politicians, and it's time for them to shut up because somebody is going to get killed other than the fireman that got killed already in Pennsylvania. Mentally ill people hear this violent, dangerous rhetoric, and we're going to have a copycat. It's coming. And it's just unfortunate. Somebody's going to get killed, even after the fireman in Pennsylvania. So what's it going to take? 66 days ago was the first assassination attempt. What have we learned? 0. And we don't need some 10,000-word report. We just need to know what happened and how do we fix it. We up here have no clue of any information of what's happened. If Joe Biden and Kamala Harris care anything about this country, they need to immediately grant President Trump as much as they possibly can the security around he and his family. One thing about President Trump, he's different. He doesn't work 6-8 hours a day. He's going to work 14, 16 hours a day. You're not going to stop him from going to outdoor events. He's also going to do more than one event, sometimes 2 to 3 events a day, and you can't do it with just a basic group of Secret Service. It can't happen. You have to, and we have to give him more support, whether it's Rangers, whether it's Navy SEALs, whether it's more DHS. I don't care. We got 48 days, and if we have something disastrous happen in this time frame between now and the election, we know what could happen. We need to take care of this president.
Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican from Alabama, at a news conference on Capitol Hill with other Senate Republicans. We'll have more about the rhetoric of violence and the reaction to it in just a moment. But first, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, writes WPTV, said Tuesday in West Palm Beach he's signing an executive order to officially launch a state-level investigation into the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump over the weekend. Governor DeSantis spoke at the training division of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office.
Today, I'm signing an executive order assigning the case involving the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump to the Office of Statewide Prosecutor under the supervision of Attorney General Ashley Moody. The suspect, Ryan Routh, is believed to have committed state law violations across multiple judicial circuits in the state. Palm Beach Judicial Circuit, the Judicial Circuit including Martin County, as well as perhaps the Judicial Circuit represented by Broward County. Also, the state of Florida has jurisdiction over the most serious, straightforward offense, which is attempted murder. I've directed state agencies to move expeditiously and to provide full transparency to the public. In my judgment, it's not in the best interest of our state or our nation to have the same federal agencies that are seeking to prosecute Donald Trump leading this investigation, especially when the most serious, straightforward offense constitutes a violation of state law, but not federal law. In addition to holding the suspect accountable, the public deserves to know the truth about how this assassination came to be. And I have directed all state agencies to work expeditiously to be able to uncover the truth in addition to holding this suspect accountable.
Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican of Florida, at a news conference today in West Palm Beach. That suspect is currently being held on 2 weapons charges while federal prosecutors prepare a broader indictment. The White House is being asked about what Donald Trump told Fox News Digital on Monday about the latest assassination attempt. As a Fox article reads, "He believed the rhetoric of Biden and Harris and he acted on it," Trump said of the gunman in an interview with Fox News Digital. "Their rhetoric is causing me to be shot at when I am the one who is going to save the country, and they are the ones who are destroying the country, both from the inside and out." Trump pointed to Biden and Harris's past comments casting Trump as a threat to democracy while telling Americans they are unity leaders. They are the opposite, Trump said. These are people that want to destroy our country. He added, "It is called the enemy from within. They are the real threat." That was from a Fox News article. Here's the question to the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her news conference at the White House.
Donald Trump blamed President Biden and Vice President Harris for the latest assassination attempt against him. He claimed without evidence that their rhetoric is causing him to be, quote, shot at. How is the White House responding to those comments?
Well, I love that you added without evidence, because I want to be very clear here. The president and the vice president have always forcefully condemned violence in all forms, including political violence, and we certainly have never encouraged any violence in any way. If anything, this is a president and a vice president has been pretty forceful about that. When it comes to differences in issues and policies, we believe that there should be a conversation. There was a debate just last week, right? There should be a conversation and a back and forth about that, a healthy conversation. And it's crucial that we do that. And the president has also said, when it comes to, violent rhetoric, we got to bring the temperature down. You heard that directly from this president. And it is not the time to tear Americans apart. We cannot do that or divide our country. The president and the vice president is always going to call that out. But they have been very clear, very forceful on condemning any form of political violence.
So do the president and vice president believe that the kind of language that Trump used in those comments I just said are contributing to the tension and divisiveness you just talked about?
It is, look, we're going to be really clear, we've always have been. It is important to bring down the temperature. To bring that temperature down of that political violent rhetoric. We've been very clear about that. And we believe, this president believes, let's not forget why he decided to run in 2020, was about that, was about making sure that we bring the country together, that we bring people together, and it was not about dividing. And so we're going to continue to be very, very clear about that. We're going to continue to call that out.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, part of her news conference today at the White House. Senator J.D. Vance, Republican from Ohio, the Republican vice presidential nominee, campaigned today in Sparta, Michigan, and again pointed to rhetoric from Democrats as he recalled the conversation he had with Donald Trump after the second assassination attempt.
So let's talk a little bit about public policy. But before I do that, I want to just address the elephant in the room here, which is, of course, just a couple of days ago, my running mate, my dear friend and our next president, was nearly assassinated again. 2 assassination attempts in as many months. And I think that it's time to say to the Democrats, to the media, to everybody that has been attacking this man and trying to censor this man for going on 10 years, cut it out or you're going to get somebody killed. Now, I actually, of course, heard about the news before almost anybody else. I was sitting at home with my son, and we were doing, what we always do when my wife's not around. We were playing video games. We get that like 1 hour. All right, we can play video games, and then before mom comes back, we got to cut that crap out. Sorry, honey. I just told on myself. But we're sitting there, and I get a phone call. It says Donald J. Trump, so I answer it. And he says, "JD, you won't believe it. They just tried to do it again." I said, "What did they try to do?" He said, "Well, they just tried to shoot me again." And I said, "What? No way." I almost couldn't believe it when he first told me. And I said, "Oh, my God, sir, I'm so glad you're okay. But, you're physically okay. Clearly, you wouldn't be calling me. Are you okay in all the ways that matter?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm doing fine." And that's just who he is. He just gets shot, almost shot a second time, and he's totally fine. He was a little annoyed about one thing, though. He was mad because he was on the 6th hole and he was about to make a birdie putt. And he said, I'm kind of pissed off they wouldn't let me finish my birdie. I was having the round of my life, and I said, well, okay, sir, I think it makes sense, though, that they got you off the golf course. But, it goes to show there is a difference in leadership style. There is a guy who takes a bullet to the head and stands up and says, fight, fight, fight. There is a guy who takes a second almost assassination attempt and responds to it with grace and good humor. And then there's a woman who is terrified of the American media. Who do we think ought to be the President of the United States? Donald J. Trump. That's right. And how nice is it, by the way, to have a presidential candidate and, of course, a former president that we can be proud of, that we can believe in, and that is tough enough to take the slings and arrows but still be fighting every single day for the American people. That's what he's done, and that's what he'll continue to do. So let's talk about exactly what that's going to look like. Because look, we all know that the reason why groceries are unaffordable, the reason why Americans can't afford to buy a home is because Kamala Harris has refused to do her job. And my friends, I was actually yesterday with my dear friend Katie Britt, senator from Alabama, and both of us have been in politics for all of 2 years. And we were talking about how shameless these politicians are, where I guess if you've been in office for 30 years, like Kamala Harris, you can stand up and without an ounce of shame, look at the American people and say, on day one, I'm going to lower grocery prices. That's what Kamala Harris says. And on day one, we're going to lower the price of housing. And on day one, we're going to close down that southern border. It's like, Kamala, day one was 1,400 days ago. What the hell have you been doing the whole time? Why don't you stop talking and get to work?
Senator J.D. Vance, Republican of Ohio, Republican vice presidential nominee, today in Sparta, Michigan. Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, said today she called Donald Trump and told him what she has said publicly. There's no place for political violence in our country. Vice President Kamala Harris was interviewed today by a panel of journalists with the National Association of Black Journalists in a TV studio in Philadelphia. A Reuters article says that she said that if elected president, she would work with private investors to boost housing supply, acknowledging that more work was needed to lower prices for Americans. The article also says the event was scheduled after the U.S. vice president did not attend the group's convention in Chicago in July, when her Republican rival Donald Trump, in an interview, questioned her black identity. And that was all from a Reuters article. Here's a question to Vice President Harris from Jaron Gaynor, the Grio Politics managing editor, about both the economy and race.
Black men, as you know, are a closely watched voting bloc. You've hosted black men at your residence. Yep. You have engaged black men and centered them in your economic opportunity tour. Mm-hmm. But polling shows that some black men, particularly young black men, are considering voting for Donald Trump, and they see him as better for the economy. What is your message to young black male voters who feel left out of this economy, and how can your economic policies materially change their lives?
So I appreciate the spirit of the question, but I'll tell you, I've often been asked this question in a way that I've had to respond by first saying that I think it's very important to not operate from the assumption that black men are in anybody's pocket. Black men are like any other voting group. You got to earn their vote. So I'm working to earn the vote. Not assuming I'm going to have it because I am black, but because the policies and the perspectives I have understands what we must do to recognize the needs of all communities. And I intend to be a president for all people. Specifically as it relates to what we need to do, to your point around economic opportunity. Yes, I started way before I was at the top of the ticket at what I called an economic opportunity tour, focused on black men. Understanding that, for example, we have so many entrepreneurs in the community who do not have access to capital, but they've got great ideas, an incredible work ethic, the ambition, the aspiration, the dream, but don't have the relationships necessarily. So my work has included, as vice president, getting billions more dollars into community banks, including working with the big banks to do that, so that we can increase access to capital for our small businesses, for our startups. Part of my plan under my economic opportunity plan going forward is that right now, startup entrepreneurs, small businesses only get a tax deduction of $5,000. Nobody can start a small business with $5,000. So I'm expanding that to $50,000. Understanding, again, that when people have the opportunity to have the resources to get started, they're going to put the good ideas, they're going to put the hard work into it. And part of what I also know is that our young black men, our black men, just like any group of people, anybody, our small businesses are really the backbone of our economy overall. And when they do better economically, we all do better. Part of my work is about understanding what we need to do in dealing with, for example, the historic inequities that have faced the black community around home ownership, right? I don't have to go through the history with anybody here about what that has meant in terms of redlining, what that has meant in terms of biases in home appraisals, and what the impact it has had on stemming the opportunity to build intergenerational wealth because of those obstacles. So part of the work that I have done and will continue to do is identify, speak truth about those obstacles, and address them. Another example is medical debt. 1 in 4 black families or individuals is more likely to carry medical debt than others. So part of my perspective, and as vice president, part of the work that we have done is to say that we're going to eliminate medical debt from being on your credit score. Because until now, medical debt worked against your credit score, and people know their credit score like your weight, right? You know that number. And the difference between what that number is and what it needs to be is the difference between you being able to get a car loan, a small business loan, or even a lease on an apartment. And so part of my approach is understanding the obstacles that traditionally and currently exist to allow anyone, including black men, be able to achieve economic wealth. And I'm going to tell you, I don't think it is sufficient to just only talk about economic policy around reducing unemployment. It is an important marker, and I'm proud of the work that we've done thus far. But it should be a baseline there, everybody's working. The point is, do people have an opportunity to build wealth? If that's what they choose to do, if that's what they want to do. And a lot of my perspective as we go forward is just that. I believe that there are a lot of opportunities that are available to the American people if we just see people and understand what they want for themselves and their families, and then meet them where they are.
Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, at a forum in Philadelphia hosted by the National Association of Black Journalists. She was questioned by 3 journalists for about 45 minutes on domestic and foreign policy. This is Washington Today. Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch spoke about political divisiveness dating to the founding of the country and ways to overcome it as part of a discussion with students at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia on this National Constitution Day, which commemorates the signing of the U.S. Constitution on September 17th, 1787.
We live in a time when people are pretty tough on one another, don't you think? And you think that's unique to our time and place, but it really isn't. And I'm not saying things couldn't be better now. I'm not saying that. They could be a lot better. But the same sort of disagreements were going on in 1776 and in 1789. In 1789, when the Constitution Convention gathered, about 50 people from all over the then colonies, the states, they weren't sure they were going to be able to come to agreement. Most people thought it was futile, that it wasn't going to work, right? You had big states versus small states. You had southern states versus northern states. You had commercial interests versus rural interests. big differences in those days. They may seem small to us today, but they were very big then. And one way they made sure that they were going to reach success was by being kind to one another, those people who gathered. They made sure that they had dinner clubs and social clubs outside of the time they were gathered in Independence Hall. And they made sure those clubs included people from different groups. It wasn't just one clique and another clique. Another thing they did was promise not to leak any of their deliberations, that anything you said in that room, the room where it happened, would remain in the room where it happened. And they trusted one another to do that, and that helped them get to an agreement. Is it perfect? No, but it was a heck of a lot better than what came before. And so those are some of the messages that we need, I think, for our own time. And the way I think of it is what my wife's grandmother used to always say. You're going to have a lot of regrets in life, things you did that you shouldn't have done, things that you didn't do that you should have done. But the one thing you're never going to regret in life is being kind.
Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, speaking to students on this National Constitution Day. Story from Associated Press: House Speaker Mike Johnson will move ahead with a temporary spending bill that would prevent a partial government shutdown when the new budget year begins on October 1st, despite the headwinds that prompted him to pull the bill from consideration last week. The bill includes a requirement that people registering to vote must provide proof of citizenship, which has become a leading election year priority for Republicans, raising the specter of non-citizens voting in the U.S., even though it's already illegal to do so, and research has shown that such voting is rare. The legislation would fund agencies at current levels, while lawmakers work out their differences on a full-year spending agreement. Democrats and some Republicans are pushing for a shorter extension. A temporary fix would allow the current Congress to hammer out a final bill after the election and get it to President Joe Biden's desk for his signature. But Johnson and some of the more conservative members of his conference are pushing for a 6-month extension in the hopes that Republican nominee Donald Trump will win the election and give them more leverage when crafting the full-year bill. That was from the Associated Press. That debate and vote scheduled for Wednesday. As always, House is live gavel to gavel on C-SPAN television and anywhere on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Today, the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, was asked about the funding measures.
Susan Collins said yesterday that a 6-month CR could have a devastating impact on defense spending. Do you think your House colleagues should drop this idea of 6-month CR and do a 3-month CR until December?
I think we first have to wait and see what the House sends us. My only observation about this whole discussion is the one thing you cannot have is a government shutdown. It would be politically beyond stupid for us to do that right before the election, because certainly we'd get the blame. And one of my favorite old sayings is there's no education in the second kick of a mule. We've been here before. I'm for whatever avoids a government shutdown, and that'll ultimately end up, obviously, being a discussion between the Democratic leader and the Speaker of the House as to how to process avoiding government shutdown.
Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, the minority leader at a news conference. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, spoke about this on the Senate floor.
The clock's ticking for Congress to reach an agreement to keep the government open beyond the September 30th deadline. That's 13 days away. At this point in the process, the only way we can prevent a harmful government shutdown is by both sides working together to reach a bipartisan agreement. That's the only way. Speaker Johnson is reportedly going to hold a vote on his 6-month CR tomorrow. But the only thing that will accomplish is make clear that he's running into a dead end. We must have a bipartisan plan instead. Now, I'll say this. For all its faults, I'm heartened about one thing that Speaker Johnson is doing. Speaker Johnson's plan preserves the essence of the Schumer-Johnson agreement that set top-line funding levels for 2024. It's encouraging fiscal year 2024. It's encouraging to see that Speaker Johnson, at least for now, is resisting the hard-right choices in his party and not pushing across-the-board cuts that would be so harmful to the American people. I hope it's a sign that the Speaker realizes that these bipartisan funding levels must be part of any solution moving forward. But beyond that, the Speaker's CR is too unworkable. I urge him to drop his plan, to work together to reach a bipartisan agreement with the other leaders, Leader McConnell, Leader Jeffries, and myself, as well as the White House. We do not have time to spare.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. House Speaker Mike Johnson put out a statement today. Congress has an immediate obligation to do two things: responsibly fund the federal government and ensure the security of our elections. Because we owe this to our constituents, we will move forward on Wednesday with a vote on the 6-month CR and the SAVE Act attached. That's the bill that requires proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote. The statement goes on, I urge all of my colleagues to do what the overwhelming majority of the people of this country rightfully demand and deserve: prevent non-American citizens from voting in American elections. The Hill's congressional reporter Michael Schnell posting on X, Speaker Johnson just told me, we will see. We're still having conversations. That's how the process works. When I asked if the CR plus SAVE Act will pass tomorrow. And another quote from the Speaker, this is the play we're running, and I'll be working around the clock to try to get it done. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 15, NASDAQ up 35, S&P up 1. Article from Roll Call, the House on Tuesday is set to consider legislation that would fill a nearly $3 billion gap in veterans benefits ahead of a September 20th deadline. Department of Veterans Affairs said up to 7 million veterans and their beneficiaries were at risk of missing their October 1st benefits if Congress did not act. A 2022 law that expanded eligibility for veterans exposed to toxins overseas led to an influx of demand and the funding gap, the VA has said. The bill would provide $2.3 billion for VA compensation and pensions and $597 million for readjustment benefits. The VA is facing an additional $12 billion gap in its fiscal 2025 health care accounts. That was from Roll Call. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The House will be in order.
This year, C-SPAN celebrates 45 years of covering Congress like no other. Since 1979, we've been your primary source for Capitol Hill, providing balanced, unfiltered coverage of government, taking you to where the policy's debated and decided, all with the support of America's cable companies. C-SPAN, 45 years and counting, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. The Senate today voted not to take up a bill that would guarantee access to IVF, in vitro fertilization, across the country. The vote was 51 to 44, a majority, but short of the 60 votes needed. There were 2 Republicans who voted yes with the Democrats, Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. This is the second time the Senate has blocked the IVF access bill. CNN article says the vote is part of a broader push by Senate Democrats to draw a contrast with Republicans over reproductive health care as the 2024 elections approach. And it will also give Democrats an opportunity to put Republicans on the spot after GOP presidential nominee Donald Trump said in August that if elected, he would implement a policy to require either the government or insurance companies to pay for IVF treatment. Democrats have questioned the sincerity of the proposal. That was from CNN. Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, spoke at a rally on the steps of the Capitol building before the vote.
Later today, we will be voting for the second time on our Right to IVF Act, a bill that protects the right to IVF nationally. It lowers the cost of IVF for families with stronger insurance coverage requirements, and it helps more veterans and service members get IVF. Last time, Republicans killed this bill, and Trump said nothing. Now he says he is a leader on IVF. Well, that tells me 2 things. First, he probably doesn't understand what IVF is. And secondly, he doesn't understand what leadership is. The only reason IVF is in jeopardy is because Donald Trump overturned Roe, something he has never stopped bragging about. Now Republicans in Congress are playing the same game, posturing as pro-family while voting down this bill to help families grow, pretending to support IVF while championing fetal personhood. But despite Republicans' record, their empty claims about IVF support are only getting more and more brazen. If Republicans are serious about supporting IVF, if Trump's promise to help families pay for it is more than just bluster, there is no reason we can't pass this bill into law and help a lot of people.
Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, during a rally on the Capitol steps. During the Senate floor debate on the bill, right before the vote, Senator Katie Britt, Republican of Alabama, said she would prefer that a bill she has introduced, which Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, come up instead.
Mr. President, I am proud today to be joining my colleague from Texas in support of the IVF Protection Act. I am grateful to Senator Cruz for his leadership on this important topic. Both Senator Cruz and I are parents. We can both attest to the fact that there is no greater blessing in life than our children. For many Americans, building a family, becoming a mom or a dad, that's their American dream. IVF makes the difference in achieving that dream for millions of Americans who are facing infertility. IVF helps aspiring parents to start families, to grow their family. In the U.S., nearly 200 babies are born a day, so nearly 2% of all babies born are because of IVF. This treatment is really a game changer for so many families. That's why I strongly support continued nationwide access to IVF. IVF is legal and available from coast to coast in every single corner of America and in all 50 states. That includes my home state of Alabama, where Governor Ivey and the Alabama legislature acted quickly to protect IVF access. Today, we have an opportunity to act quickly and overwhelmingly to protect continued nationwide IVF access for loving American families. Our IVF Protection Act would do just that. It would give aspiring parents nationwide the certainty and peace of mind that IVF will remain legal and available in every state. Our bill is the only bill that protects IVF access while safeguarding religious liberty. It also could get 60 votes in the United States Senate, and isn't that the point? Yet we're going to have a show vote when we've been talking and saying that we want to protect access to IVF, but yet no one is working to actually get to the 60 vote threshold, which makes me wonder how serious my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are about this. In an era of hyper-partisanship, this bill, the IVF Protection Act, should be the one that's on the floor today.
Senator Katie Britt, Republican from Alabama, on the Senate floor. She and Senator Ted Cruz, the co-sponsor of their bill, asked unanimous consent to pass it, and that was blocked. And then there was a roll call vote on the bill from the Democratic majority, and that failed to advance 51-44, short of the 60 votes needed. President Joe Biden received a briefing today about wildfire season and the federal response and federal efforts to reduce wildfire risk in the future. White House says that joining the president in the White House Oval Office was Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, U.S. Forest Service Chief Randy Moore, and Liz Sherwood Randall, Homeland Security Advisor. And taking part remotely, Governor Gavin Newsom, Democrat of California, Governor Tina Kotek, Democrat of Oregon, and Grant Beebe, Assistant Director for Fire and Aviation, Bureau of Land Management. President Biden spoke for a few minutes before the meeting began.
I'm about to receive a briefing on everything we're doing to support the people and communities threatened by these terrific wildfires, and they're devastating. As I was saying to my staff before they came in, since I've been president, I've flown over more of these wildfires from Arizona to Idaho and Montana and all that whole crescent than makes up the entire state of Maryland burned to the ground. And and there's a lot that has to be, so we're not going to be able to speak to all of it tonight, but today. But we're going to talk a little bit about California and what's going on in Oregon as well. Nationwide, nearly 37,000 wildfires burning over 7.3 million acres, more land than some of the states we occupy. In California, they have 3 major wildfires destroying homes and displacing thousands of people. Thousands of people. In Oregon, there's nearly 1.8 million acres burned. And it sounds like it's something good when you say it's a record, but it's a bad state record. It's real. And my administration is working closely around the clock to control these fires and protect our people, but it's always a matter of resources. And I look forward to this briefing from key members of my administration who've been working like hell on this, and 2 frontline governors. And by the way, what I'd like to do is I'd like to make we've raised the pay to $29 an hour. I want to make that permanent for these firefighters. Anyway, so that's what we're going to be talking about, folks, and thank you for making the effort to come in. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys, Mr. President.
President Biden in the White House Oval Office. Los Angeles Times has an article. Amid an outbreak of recent wildfires in California, Google announced a commitment to spend $13 million to improve satellite imaging to help track and detect wildfires starting as early as next year. FireSat, a constellation of more than 50 satellites, will be able to detect wildfires as small as the size of a classroom, about 16 by 16 feet. The first satellite will launch in early 2025, the media giant announced Monday. Firefighting authorities currently rely on satellite imagery that detects wildfires, but only when they reach about the size of a football field, or more than an acre. That was from the LA Times. From Reuters, at least 8 people were killed and 2,750 others, including Hezbollah fighters, medics, and Iran's envoy to Beirut, were wounded on Tuesday when the pagers they used to communicate exploded across Lebanon, security sources and Lebanese health minister said. Lebanon's information minister said the government condemned the detonation of the pagers as an Israeli aggression. Hezbollah also blamed Israel for the pager blast and said it would receive its fair punishment. The Israeli military declined to comment on Reuters' inquiries about the detonations. Israel and the Iran-backed Hezbollah have been engaged in cross-border warfare since the Gaza war erupted last October, in the worst such escalation in years. That was from Reuters. At the U.S. State Department in Washington, spokesperson Matthew Miller asked about this.
What does the U.S. know about what happened? There have been a series of deaths and injuries, apparently, from exploding pagers. Was the U.S. have any knowledge? What does it know now, and when did it know about what has happened?
So we are gathering information on this incident. I can tell you that the U.S. was not involved in it. The U.S. was not aware of this incident in advance, and at this point, we're gathering information.
And what information have you gathered so far?
We'll continue to collect information. I don't have any public readout to give now, but we're collecting information in the same way that journalists are across the world to gather the facts about what might have happened.
Obviously, it doesn't take much guesswork who the most likely culprit would be in terms of doing this, in terms of who the enemy of Hezbollah is. Do you have any indications that to doubt that it would be Israel that was behind the...
I don't have any assessment to offer one way or other at this point.
And I know you're saying that, but in terms of what this means, I mean, there's been for a number of weeks the talk of dialing down, or at least not having a retaliation from Iran over, sort of a tit for tat, if you will. How does this play into it? Is there any message that you're sending to Israel in terms of what to do next, or for that matter to Iran, to Hezbollah, in terms of how to respond to this?
So I never want to either comment or speculate about the impact of any one incident, especially in the early stages of an incident, and I'm not going to do so here. That's been our consistent policy to try and avoid doing. I will say that our overall policy remains consistent, which is we do want to see a diplomatic resolution to the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. We want to see one that allows the tens of thousands of Israelis who've been displaced from their homes and the tens of thousands of Lebanese who have been displaced from their homes to be able to return home, and that's what we are continuing to pursue.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference in Washington. New York Times article says that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel is reportedly contemplating dismissing his defense minister, a move that would help stabilize his fractious ruling coalition but potentially create instability at the top of Israel's defense establishment at a time of mounting tensions with Hezbollah. Russian President Vladimir Putin, begins a CNN article, has ordered the country's military to increase its number of troops by 180,000. Third time he has expanded its ranks since launching his invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The increase would take the overall number of Russian military personnel to nearly 2.4 million, including 1.5 million troops, according to the decree published by the Kremlin Monday. The new staffing will come into effect in December, it said. That was from CNN. Pat Ryder is the Pentagon press secretary.
Reaction to Russia's announcement about trying to scale up to 1.5 million members of their armed forces. What are the concerns at the Pentagon? Is that a realistic possibility? And just kind of in general, has Russia improved, or has the war in Ukraine given them a lot of blows as a military writ large?
Yeah, well, without, again, speaking for the Russian Ministry of Defense, I mean, we certainly have to take the rhetoric seriously. I think, and you've heard many throughout the U.S., to include Secretary Austin, talk about the incredible negative impact that Russia's war in Ukraine has had on the Russian military. I mean, the rates of casualties that they're experiencing are staggering. The estimate earlier this month that the Secretary provided was, over 350,000 casualties. So certainly, in that regard, it's not surprising that the Russians would be looking at ways to augment their force going forward. Whether or not that's sustainable from an economic standpoint, from a readiness standpoint, those are all good questions, but best addressed by the Russian military itself.
Pat Ryder, Pentagon press secretary and Air Force Major General, at his news conference. New York Times article says a long-awaited plan to help Ukraine rebuild using Russian money is in limbo as the United States and Europe struggle to agree on how to construct a $50 billion loan using Russia's foreign central bank assets while complying with their own laws. Finally, on Washington Today, Billie Jean King, who's in the Tennis Hall of Fame, longtime activist for women's equality in sports, set to become the first individual female athlete to be awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. The Senate has already passed a bill to do that, and today the House took it up. The bill manager was Congresswoman Young Kim, Republican from California.
I'm honored to be here today to celebrate the historic accomplishments of Miss Billie Jean King. Billie Jean is a tennis legend. She was introduced to tennis at 11 years old and dominated the game until her retirement from competition in 1983. She reached number one in the world with 39 Grand Slam singles, doubles, and mixed doubles titles. We're in awe of her athletic achievements and the impact on the game. However, we're not here today just to talk about her accomplishments on the court. Mr. Speaker, Billie Jean used her notoriety and her platform to fight for equal rights and equal opportunities for all, not just in sports, but in American society as well. She became an advocate for female athletes at a time when female accomplishments were not celebrated or rewarded in the same way as her male counterparts. Billie Jean had an instrumental hand in shaping the opportunities in education and sports for girls and women. Without her efforts and dedication to the passage of the Title IX of the Education Amendments Act of 1972, America would look very different today. After that legislative win, Billie Jean focused her efforts on lobbying for equal prize money for both men and women at the 1973 U.S. Open Tennis Championships. Although it would take another 34 years for the other three major tennis tournaments to offer equal prize money, she started a conversation that continued to push through barriers with her actions. That same year, Billie Jean did something unprecedented and played a tennis match against former world #1 player, male tennis star Bobby Riggs. She defeated Riggs, and this match became a firm declaration of women's role in sports. Through her leadership, bravery, and activism, we owe her a huge debt of gratitude. I can think of no person more deserving to earn this distinguished honor.
Congresswoman Young Kim, Republican from California, on the House floor, a bill to award Billie Jean King the Congressional Gold Medal. After the House passes this bill, it'll be sent to President Biden's desk for signature into law. Billie Jean King was also awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, in 2009. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. You can sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.